Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for turning in today. I apologize for the late start. We've been having a little bit of technical difficulty here. It does turn out that there are some things that it is easier to do while working from home, and doing a training webinar is actually one of them. But I think we're go now, so we're going to go ahead and start with part one of the PIR presentation. This will be followed by two more. There will be another training tomorrow on family services, and then Monday we will be covering disabilities. So we're going to try to keep these short and sweet. I'm not covering very much material each time. It's going to be kind of targeted to fix certain problems and get data that we need. So I will ask you, please, we've muted everybody for now, and we're asking you to hold your questions to the end. You can put them in the question chat box, which should be part of your webinar dashboard. And then when we get to certain stopping points, I'll take a look at those, and then at the end, I will review questions. As Tom mentioned, we will be sending out the PowerPoint after the webinar today, and there's another form, which I'll cover when I get to it, that we're also going to send out. We're asking people to return to document their teacher turnover. So having said that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So we have very specific goals with today's training. We want to make sure that all our agencies can update and complete Section B of the PIR. We're trying to get that done by the end of this month. As I'm sure most of you are aware, our current grant year for the feds ends at that point, and we're still not completely certain what kinds of changes in status and configuration we'll have going forward from there. At any rate, every year, we have some different staffing patterns over the summer. Some classrooms are closed, some classrooms change how they're operating, and so that teachers kind of move around from room to room for the summer. And so every year when we report the PIR, we're actually not trying to report the status in August. We're trying to get a snapshot of June. So this year we're just trying to get that done in June. And that way any status changes that happen after July 1st will not affect the PIR that we are reporting on our current grant year. And so then I want, as a part of that, to help staff increase knowledge of how to put staff information correctly in Copa, to help monitoring HR functions, classroom staffing, and reporting activities, and so on. So we're going to cover how to enter the staff information so that it appears correctly on the PIR, to deepen everybody's knowledge of the HR module in Copa so that admin users and HR users are familiar with each other's functions and how the system works and can work together better to make sure everything is up to date. And then increase everyone's ability to monitor Copa and ensure that teacher and staff funding, classroom funding all agree for each class. So the key points that we're going to take away, I'll hit these again at the end, but our grant period is ending in June 30th, and we're trying to get a snapshot of staffing that is accurate by that point. And as part of that, every operating classroom must have teaching staff. We cannot report vacancies on the PIR. So if you have 3 classrooms, for Head Start, you need at least 3 teachers, and then 3 other adults who can be teachers or assistants, but we need 6 adults for those 3 classrooms. Again, we cannot report vacancies. Someone is in there, and we need that information. We assign staff when we look in Copa and we see someone in classroom 3, that should be the person in classroom 3. If we go there, or a federal reviewer goes there, or anybody else, that's the person that we'll find. And then funding source, I want everyone to understand what that means. We're actually talking about the funding stream of classroom operations, not necessarily where their funding comes from in the budget. Hopefully those are the same, but if there's a divergence, we need to go with the operations and not the money. So for the people who came in last year, and of course we did not submit a PIR last year because of the pandemic, this might be your first time around, so I'm going to back up a little and just speak for a moment about what we're talking about. The Head Start Program Information Report is a comprehensive report that is submitted to the Office of Head Start annually, again, except for 2020. And it provides comprehensive data on services, staff, children, and families served in Head Start and Early Head Start programs. So grantees and delegates all need to have a submitted PIR every year. So that means a report is submitted for every agency and also for every program. So if you're at a site that has both Head Start and Early Head Start Child Care Partnership programs, there will be one report submitted for each of those. So a few lucky agencies will have as many as 4 that are submitted at the end of the year. The responses that we're getting to submit these are primarily drawn from Copa. So if you have been entering child information correctly, family services correctly, there isn't that much you need to do to get the PIR ready. We pull the data from the PIR report in Copa, and then we enter it into the online form at the Head Start Enterprise system. However, the report has seen significant changes since the last time we submitted it, which is 2019. Because of the pandemic, there are new items and questions and categories have been reorganized since then. So those are the reasons that we need to cover some things now. In other words, Copa isn't reporting everything that we need because the fields that we're trying to report on have been added since the beginning of this program year. And so not everything is documented. So we're just going to cover how to correct those and get the information that we need in as quickly as possible here. So as I said, most of the data are available, but there are 3 key areas that have significant gaps. So when we review the PIR from here, we see that we need programs to correct the information in the system in order for us to report. And that is human resources, and we're covering that today. When I say there are gaps in human resources, what I'm trying to say is that there are missing or misclassified teachers in the system, and we need that to be corrected so that we can get a correct head count. Family services, a lot of people have been expressing concerns to me, frankly, that they're trying to put family service information in Copa and it's not being documented correctly. That is because the categories of the referrals and services have changed, and the whole look of how the PIR is reporting on those has changed. So we may have to go back and correct some records or reclassify some records in order to make the services show up. And then we will be covering disabilities, which is an expanded section on the new PIR, and we will be talking about the additional fields and how that has been reorganized on Monday. Okay, so today is section B. The new PIR can be found in Copa. It's report 999F. To take a look at the changes, you can still look at the regular 999 report, which is the 2019 report. You can see how the categories have changed. Section B reports information on staff working under a Head Start or Early Head Start grant. Most of it is about teachers. There used to be more management staff information that has been moved to a new section, and we only report that once per grant as a grantee. So that takes a lot of work away from you. So that is a pleasant surprise this year. It also has teacher qualifications, salaries, ethnicity, language, information about teacher turnover, which, again, we will need to cover an update by the end of this month, if possible. So, in order to make the report possible and monitoring in Copa possible, we need to have teachers entered in Copa, and then they must be entered correctly, of course, but they also have to go in immediately upon employment. For teaching staff, that means anyone who's in front of the class has to be entered into Copa so that we can monitor and ensure compliance with staffing requirements. That does include temporary staff, contracted staff, long-term substitutes. So if you're saying your teacher has left and the position is vacant, one of 2 things must happen. either someone else needs to be in that classroom or you need to send all the kids home because there has to be a teacher. So programs have to comply with child-teacher ratio requirements at all times, which means we need to know that there's 2 adults in front of that Head Start class, and so we need them both in Copa. Okay, so one thing that you know everyone should understand is in order to update the staff file, you must be an HR user. So even if you're a site director who is an admin user and has control over the entire site in Copa, you must have an HR user working with you to update teachers in classrooms. It actually requires both a human resources user and an admin user to completely do the updates in Copa. The way this program is structured, neither type of user has the power to do everything necessary to update teachers in classrooms. So there we go. We go under the HR. If you are logged in as an HR user, you have that HR tab. Under there, you would select Add New Staff, and you'll be taken first to the staff personal information page. The first time you're putting someone in, it's going to ask you some basic information. Agency and site, for example, are on here on this page for initial data entry. When you come back to an existing teacher file, they're no longer on the personal information page. They can be found on the employment page. So there's some required information that we need to have for everybody on this staff file. The address, work phone, email, salary and funding source, and demographic information are required, as is a background check. But please do not enter the employee's social security numbers in Copa. The field is there. We used to ask for that. We do not now because of identity theft and data security concerns. The state of Illinois has changed its policies around who can use a social security number for what. And so just as with our clients, in Copa anyway, we are not collecting social security numbers, and that is for the protection of our staff. One thing that must be entered, and this is really key for understanding how to make the PIR look right, is the funding source. The F in the 999F report stands for funding. Prior to a couple years ago, we had a PIR that filtered who appeared on what report according to something that was called the PIR program model. But due to our multiple overlapping sources of funding, that proved to be an unworkable solution. So we have worked with Copa to construct a new report that is the 999F, and this filters everybody, classrooms, teachers, other staff, and children and families according to funding source. But that means in order to have the right people on the right report, the funding source needs to be accurate. So for human services, you need to have all of the relevant funding sources for all staff entered into their HR file. Now, when we talk about the appropriate funding source, I'm not actually talking about what appears on your budget, because there can be some obscure, to me anyway, reasons why you might have a different mix of funding sources allocated to a staff person based on all of their job functions. However, for classroom staff, the funding sources should reflect the children in the classroom. So if you have a program that is Head Start and is collaborated with Preschool for All, then when we look in that teacher file, both of those funding sources need to be listed. So if the budget doesn't say they're paid out of Preschool for All, but there are Preschool for All children in the class, that needs to be a funding source. You can put 0. The way that Copa works, your percentages must add up to 100%, but some of those percentages can be 0. So you can put in 5 funding sources and one is 100% and then 0, 0, 0, 0, and it will still take it. It still adds up to 100%. But the important thing is that an identified funding source, even without actual money associated to it, will then associate this record with the PIR. So the sample that I have on the screen, you see that it's got Early Head Start and PI as their funding sources. So that means they will show up on the Early Head Start PIR because it's an identified funding source. Now, this agency also has an Early Head Start Child Care Partnership program. This staff person will not show up on that report because there is no funding source identified for Early Head Start Child Care Partnership. So, and the first place to check if you say, we have more teachers in this and they're not showing up on the report, is right there. Look in their staff file and find out if they have the appropriate funding source identified. Okay, the second thing is that we should not have mixed funding source between age groups for classroom staff. And that unfortunately is true even if that's really how they're funded, because I don't know why, perhaps they're doing disabilities work as well and they do it for both age groups. So 5% of your Early Head Start teachers' salary comes from Head Start. I don't know, but we don't want that in their staff file, even if it's true, because if they have a job title of teacher and there is a Head Start as one of their funding sources, they will show up as a teacher on the Head Start PIR. So if you don't want them there because they're in a classroom with birth to 3 people, they should not have 3 to 5-year-old funding on there. So again, if you've got a Head Start classroom, the Head Start must be one of the funding sources, and Early Head Start should not be, because your Head Start teacher should not be on the Early Head Start PIR. Okay. Okay, so the next piece to put them not just on the right report, but on the right line of the report is position and classification. So on the employment tab of the HR file, there are 2 separate items here. Position is what we normally call the job title, and then classification is a broad category. And some of these classifications refer directly to the PIR. If you look through the report, you'll see there's like a child development staff section. And then in section D, which you guys don't have to report anymore, there's a management staff section. So picking that classification, again, will associate a record with part of the report. So for staff working with Head Start children, or in fact with all other birth or 3 to 5-year-old children, the correct classification is child development staff. For teachers who are working with birth to 3 children, Early Head Start, or Prevention Initiative, those are infant toddler child development staff. Now, that's a hard and fast distinction when you're talking about center-based childcare. When you're talking about family childcare homes or home visiting, however, obviously that picture can be muddled. So we have an administrative setting on the back end of Copa that will take everybody in those positions and will include infant toddler staff and child development staff. However, what you want to do with those positions is look at the majority of their caseload. So if mostly they work with 3 to 5-year-olds, then they should be child development staff. And if mostly they work birth to 3, then they should be infant toddler staff. But the distinction doesn't make as much difference for home visiting or family childcare homes. But it's a hard and fast piece. It must be right for the center-based. Okay, so just a few points about classification, and you don't have to try to desperately write all this down right now. We will be sending out this PowerPoint presentation, hopefully later today, along with another spreadsheet for you to fill out. But I'm just going over it right now so that you can get a ballpark idea of how this is organized. So for infant and toddler child development staff, those are your Early Head Start every variation of early Head Start teachers, birth to 3, education coaches, specialists, supervisors, family child care, home staff, home visitors. All of those are going to be child development, early infant toddler child development staff. Child development staff is the same. It's everybody from the education coaches to this classroom teacher, assistant teacher, family child care workers, again, home visitors. But they work with 3 to 5-year-olds. Management staff essentially are your defined management positions for the PIR, which I don't know what other information will be displayed if you look it up in section D, because it's only for the grantee at this point. But the job titles were laid out there. Got the directors, the education manager, the health service manager. All of those people on this list are management staff. They're not administrative staff. Administrative staff means roughly secretarial or support staff, the front desk. So even though we refer to them as administrators, managers, directors, those are management staff. And then the family community partnership staff will be social worker, family support worker. You might classify, if you have someone who's specifically an URCEA worker who does, intake and enrollment, they might count under that category as well, because they're in contact with families. Okay, here's the next big piece before we get any more into the weeds of the details, is early Head Start teachers. There are no assistant teachers in early Head Start. And you may say, yes, well, my program does have assistant teachers, which, okay, perhaps you do. But if you look at the program information report, you will see there is no line to report them. So it just asks for teachers on the report, and you still need 2 people per classroom to meet the staffing requirements. So both of those people must have a teacher job title. We cannot have a assistant teacher. We can't report them because there isn't a line for it. So here is the definition. This is actually a screenshot from the actual report, which, as I mentioned, is on the federal website. It's on the Head Start Enterprise system, and there's a separate report for every delegate already set up in there, and we just fill out the detail. So the instructions they give us are here. I'll go over them in a little more detail in the next couple of slides, but essentially they say include all teachers, everyone who's in front of the class. Each center-based infant and toddler class must provide 1 for each group of 4 children with a total group size of 8, which means you need 2 teachers. And it also says don't include people who are not teachers. We'll get into that for a minute. So the basic language here is that they want education and child development staff, both part-time and full-time, in classroom settings, regardless of the funding source for their salaries, who provide services to infants, toddlers, and pregnant women. And they specifically say include contracted education and child development staff and the education and child development staff of partnering agencies that provide services to infants, toddlers, and pregnant women. So when they're saying that specifically that you should include contracted staff, that means if you have a vacancy, and so you have a temp who's in the classroom but doesn't work for you, like officially, they're working for a staffing agency, they still need to be on the PIR if that's the person who is providing the early childhood education services. So obviously, if they're only there for a couple days, you're not going to get around to putting them in Copa, but someone needs to be an active teacher associated with that file. So if you've got someone who's left and someone is going to be in there for several weeks while you try to onboard a new teacher, we need that person in Copa at the time. So when we monitor this at the time, there's a body there in front of the class. And again, they say all lead teachers and co-lead teachers count as classroom teachers for early Head Start. So if there is a third person in there and it says they do not fit the definition of classroom teacher, And what that means is if really it means if you've got a third adult in the classroom to cover, so you always have two people there if someone has to take a break, and that third person is not a qualified teacher, you don't need to put them in as a teacher, but they shouldn't be an assistant just because of the way Copa will then play with their salary in terms of the staffing averages later in the report. So they need to be identified as either a teacher or a teacher aide, but we need 2 teachers per class, and then you can have additional staff as well as those 2 if needed. So for Head Start, we do have assistant teachers. You can have 2 teachers. You can't have a teacher and assistant teacher, but you cannot have 2 assistant teachers in the classroom. There must be at minimum 1 teacher identified on the report for each classroom. So if you have 7 classrooms with Head Start children in them, there need to be 7 teachers on the report, which of course means 7 teachers who have the funding source Head Start identified. And you can have more than that. You can add multiple assistants if you want to figure out that's how you can include more people who are actually in the classroom. But these are just the minimum requirements. It literally gives us an error. We can't report 7 classrooms and 6 teachers. It will not go through. We'll get an error message and say we have to increase the number. So we do need to have everyone who's in that classroom identified in order to make the report. Okay. So the next item is qualifications. There is a credentials tab in the HR file. And so under there, you can enter each teacher's degree and major under that tab. Again, these are the instructions at the bottom that come directly from the feds about the report. They said count each preschool education and child development staff person by the highest degree or credential held. But this will be the highest relevant credential. So if you have a bachelor's degree in early childhood education with a master's degree in nuclear physics, you want to put the bachelor's in as the degree because that advanced degree isn't relevant. But you would put the highest relevant degree here. And then if the staff person is working towards another degree, that should also be included here because they ask questions about that at the bottom of the report, and we would like to be able to count everyone who is currently pursuing a degree. The two types of degree, or rather the 2 majors that make someone appear qualified on the PIR are either early childhood education or other coursework equivalent to an early childhood education degree. Any other major here will make them show up as not qualified because a psychology degree does not make you qualified to be a Head Start classroom teacher. So if that was the major, but they did have enough credits to qualify for an early childhood degree, then that will be when you put other coursework equivalent to an early childhood education degree. Plain old other doesn't do anything. I really wish Copa didn't give us that option so often, so please don't use it. We've also asked all of our agencies to document staff qualifications under the Gateways tab. And you see here, there's a user-defined tab within the HR file, and you can pick Gateways to Opportunity and then fill out the Gateways credentials. This is an important way that we are tracking and monitoring teacher qualifications, but it's a state of Illinois system. And so we use that to make reports to ISB. But since Head Start is federally funded, they're not that interested in the state of Illinois system, and they don't know what a Gateways credential is. So unfortunately, I know nobody likes to do double work, but we are continuing to ask that you do both things. Put in their degree and major and also their credential level achieved in gateways. That's the inevitable impact of having multiple funders as they use multiple systems to track our quality and progress. So once these steps have been taken, so we have the teacher's funding source, job title, and classification, and qualifications put in the system, as well as their basic required demographic information, that should populate most of Section B. However, for our monitoring purposes, we still need to have them associated with a direct class. So if we see in our Copa classroom setup, you have 7 classrooms and then 7 teachers in Head Start, that looks good at first glance, but if we dig into it and they're not the right people, in other words, the 7 teachers on the report are not the 7 classrooms with Head Start kids in them, it's still a problem. And the limitation of our current data system where it comes to this is that while changing a teacher's information and updating their funding and qualifications is something that an HR user can do, an HR user cannot assign a teacher to a classroom. That requires an admin user, and an admin user cannot change the funding source of a teacher. That requires an HR user. So at your site, and this is, unnecessarily complicated, I quite agree, but that's the way it works. You need to coordinate closely. So if you are a site director or administrator and you move a teacher into a different classroom, you need to make sure that the HR person is notified, assuming that's not you, so that they can change their funding sources and make sure that they agree with the funding source for the classroom. So if you move someone from a PFA classroom into the Head Start classroom, someone also needs to go in and change that teacher's funding source to say Head Start, because just putting them in the classroom is not enough to put them on the report. So to go in as an admin user, you need to edit the class profiles, which when you get into admin, you'll see a list of sites, and you pick a site, you see a list of classrooms, and here you click the box that is next to the name of the class and select Edit. And so within that, you'll get to the class profile page. Any teachers or home visitors who have been added to the Copa HR and assigned to the site at which the classroom you're looking at is based will show up on the drop-down menu. So if your teacher doesn't show up on that menu, that means they're not correctly entered in HR. Either their job title is not correct or they're not assigned to the site. Even, and this is annoying as well, but even for a single site agency, you can't just put the teacher in and assign them to all sites. It needs to specifically say the site at which the classroom is located, and that will put them on the classroom's teacher menu. Now you note that if they are appearing here, once you select the teacher, you'll see their job title, their education level, and major appear underneath the name. So you can tell if you are an admin user, even though you can't see the HR file, you can look at this and tell whether that's correct or not. Okay, so this is the class profile at large here. It's a detailed description of the services provided for each classroom, family child care home, or home visiting group. All of those, although they're not all technically classes, they all have a class profile in Copa. And then at the top where it says class type, you can pick center-based or home visiting or family child care home. In addition to identifying the teachers, it also specifies the days of operation, the classroom capacity, the language of instruction, and funding sources. So while you're in there making sure the correct teacher is assigned, that's a great opportunity to make sure that that other information is correct as well. It'll only take a few minutes and will make things so much easier for us. So a couple of things about this. Next to the class program model, in this class profile, there's a checkbox that's labeled serving preschool-aged children. That's not really what that means. That means please include me on the universal application. So if this is a classroom with slots that are being given away on the application, that should be checked. But if for some reason that's not how children are applying, then you do not want to check that. So that's really what that means. There's also an age group section that will actually ask you how old the children are. The funding sources, this is the same list as you get for funding sources under the teacher. You can select more than one by hitting control and selecting several sources. So if the children have program models that say Head Start, PFA, and childcare, all three of those should be selected for the classroom as well and for the teacher. And that way we know that they're correct. When they disagree, sometimes at the central office here, we're not clear on which one is correct. So a few things about those funding sources, and maybe I should have included this earlier when we were talking about the teacher, because this is the exact same list of funding sources. So classes with children funded by the 3 to 5 year old Preschool for All program. This is PFA DFSS. Unfortunately, we can't remove things that we don't use anymore, but PFA CPS was for CPS programs only. And when I say CPS program, I mean it's a classroom located in a CPS school. This isn't us. So unless you are a CPS employee, do not use that funding source. Instead, it's DFSS PFA. We both have Preschool for All children funded, but CPS kids are no longer in Copa. So classes with children that are just funded by our Head Start grant, you would pick Head Start as a funding source. If they receive Head Start funding, but it's not from us, same with early Head Start funding, if you have your own grants and your children are in our system because they're receiving PFA or PI, but that room isn't funded through us, this would be non-DFSS Head Start. Now, we have two different things that look like childcare in there. Plain old childcare means you are billing us for your childcare kids through cabs. And if you don't know what that means, that's not you, and you should be using Action for Children as your funding source instead. Okay, and again, there's a box that says directly operated. This is the other one that doesn't mean what it says exactly. The box means I am not a childcare partner. So that's backwards. You'd think they want to check the box if you were a partner, but they want to check the box if you're not. So if you are a partner of another agency that receives the Head Start funding, don't check the box. Otherwise, check the box. Okay, and then the last thing is the age range for the classes. 3 to 5, birth to 3, or school age. Please don't leave it blank. When we're looking at classes, we like to be able to filter by that, but if it's blank, it will be filtered out under any filtering restriction. Okay, so in order to see if this information is right, you've got the right classes, the right teachers identified. You can use a report in Copa. It's under organizational reports. It's report number 973. And the report 973 just lays out all of the classrooms in your system, and it can be customized to have specific fields added to it. But by default, if you load it, it will look something like this. You have the class name, the class funding source, the name of the teacher with teacher's funding source, and the teacher's degree. So you can look in here and see if this information is correct or not. So if the class funding source and the teacher funding source don't agree, one of them needs to change. Because again, and I didn't cover this perhaps I should have, the class funding source is also what puts the class on section A of the PIR. So Copa then does a count of how many classes and how many teachers, and it wants, or the feds do, it wants them to agree. So when you look at that report, if we're submitting it and the number doesn't add up, that's where we get an error. Okay. Before I go on, I want to take a look at some questions. Let me see. Okay, several people want to know if you can have access to this. Yes, we will send it out as soon as we can. I'm pretty sure by the end of the day. Yeah, so here the question is, what if the ratio is low and the children can be moved while the position is vacant? Then do we temporarily close the class? Yes. So if this situation is that you're under enrolled and you have a vacant position, and so you don't have two teachers for the classroom, if in practice what you've done is move the children into a smaller number of classrooms, then yeah, I don't even think you necessarily need to temporarily close the class. What you need to do is remove Head Start from its funding sources. So if you had 7 Head Start classes, but due to under enrollment, you can only fill 6 and you have a vacant teacher position, the report should really only show 6 classrooms. And in that case, you would say you would have 6 classrooms and 6 teachers and you would be fine. Now, there may be a different question that comes up about how you don't seem to have the capacity to fill the funded enrollment, but I don't think that is a error on the report. And if so, I'll just write an explanation there. Because it's true, so why not include it? So yes, if just to make sure, if the classroom is vacant because there isn't a teacher, then in order to kind of rationalize the report, the easiest way to do that is just to temporarily change the funding source so that it doesn't say Head Start, and now we don't have 7 Head Start classes, we have 6. Let me see. And then there's a question, should we put other for CCP? No, there should be a funding source in there for Early Head Start CCP. This is actually the reason that we went with the 999F. The problem that we couldn't overcome with the old report was that when we got our second Early Head Start grant, we had some teachers who only were funded by Early Head Start, the base grant, some teachers who were only funded by Early Head Start CCP, but sometimes it overlaps. So many sites put some Early Head Start and some Early Head Start Child Care Partnership slots in the same classroom. And if that's the case, the teacher needs both of their funding sources because they should appear on both PIRs. And if you have elected to put all 3 Early Head Start grants now in the same classroom, then that teacher needs to appear on all 3 of the reports. So that means they need to have all of those funding sources assigned, even if the funding percentage is 0, which it may very well be for the Early Head Start expansion since it's a much smaller grant. But that was the issue with the 999 report. People who have been with us for a few years remember we used to classify the Early Head Start Child Care Partnership grant as migrant, and we did that because Copa wanted to include all Early Head Start Child Care Partnership staff as a subset of Early Head Start, and that wasn't necessarily true. Some people were funded by both and some were not. So that's why we have to be very careful and make sure that the funding sources assigned are correct, because that's what places them on the report. And the question is this for early Head Start prevention initiative funded centers only? Well, the HR module works the same for everyone, but we do not report the PIR for preschool for all only sites. However, we do send a report to ISB. So we still need the teachers properly identified by funding source, exactly the way that I'm talking about, because that report, it's a different report, but it filters them the same way. So we would be looking for the PFA funding source as the controlling piece to include children or to include teachers and staff on the report that we will send to the state. So again, if you have a preschool for all classroom, it is essential that the teachers have that funding source or they don't appear on our reporting. So yeah, and someone said we are PFA and CCAP funded. Again, you won't then need to do tomorrow's presentation, which is all about Head Start, but we still need you to update your teachers and make sure they're accurate for preschool for all. We actually, rather than annually for PFA classes, we actually send information out about children and teachers monthly. So around the 15th, I believe, we pull and submit a list of all the teachers' classes and children. So we do need to have the teachers set up correctly. I did see when I was looking at classrooms the other day that we did still have some teachers in preschool for all classrooms whose funding source was identified as CPS. And that's why I was harping on that earlier. They don't go anywhere. Those won't be included on our report to the state because we're not CPS. We're only reporting out on PFA, DFSS. So if you're PFA and CCAP funded, then all of your teacher funding sources and all of your classrooms need to say that PFA and whichever variety of CCAP it is as your identified funding sources. Now, next question I have, should we avoid inputting the date of birth field? I understand that as well from the point of view of identity protection, but we like to have that because some people have very common names, and we have teachers and other staff who move from site to site. So it's helpful to know if it's the same person or not, because in some cases we have been able to locate an existing valid background check for a teacher who moved from one agency to another and save everybody's time. But we need to know not just that their name was, Joe Williams, which is pretty common, but that it's Joe Williams who was born in December of 1962 or whatever it was. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I have a question that's kind of it's kind of funny, but I understand why it's confusing. I have someone asking, what does it mean on the credentials tab when you see years of experience using blank and hours of training on blank? And the answer is, we tried, I think it might have been 10 years ago, to have Copa and Teaching Strategies Gold line up and connect. And so the information would have said years of experience using creative curriculum and hours of training on teaching strategies, but the connection never worked. So it's just a broken link in there. But you don't have to worry about that piece. This long term, when we like our enrollment and services tracking database to talk to teaching strategies, we very much would, but it doesn't do that right now. Okay. So Now I want to talk a little bit about teacher turnover, because it's the most difficult thing that we try to track, and frankly, we can't do it very well in Copa. So that's not how we're going to do it. For those of you who remember 2019, we're doing this very similarly. For everyone who hasn't reported a PIR before, it's going to work like this. We're going to send a spreadsheet out to you and ask you just to fill it out and send it back to us. And it's just going to be which staff left the program, when did they leave, why did they leave, and did anybody replace them? So you can see a little piece of it. Now, the only thing that's different than we did a couple years ago is that we've added a pull-down menu because we're better at Excel now. So under reasons for leaving, you'll have to select one of the reasons that is included on the PIR so we can easily total that up and report that. Now, if it doesn't cover that, then you need to choose other and then fill out the other column to say why, and we'll include that in the notes. And again, if there's also an additional question on the report about people who left for higher compensation, they want to know if that was because of the state preschool program. So they're asking essentially, did they become a public school preschool teacher? And you will answer yes or no. Okay, so we're going to send that out. It's pretty self-explanatory, but if you get that and have any questions about it, you should just direct them to me. And there is my email address. It's the best way to get a hold of me. I'll be here full-time very soon. Right now, I'm going back and forth about half and half between home and the office still. So the best way to reach me at any time is my email address. Okay. And I think I covered the questions. Again, if you have anything else. Oh, I see. Here's a couple more. Yeah, so we recently realized we didn't update our teachers for the school year. You are not alone. That is why we're having this webinar. And we'll update to reflect June 30th. But we'll update it again for the new year. Yes, and that's why we're pushing this now, because we're going to take the information out on June 30th and plug it into the federal website. And then we very much realize that starting the next week, we'll probably see some changes in classroom structure, program, the way it's organized, what roles people have. So that's why we need this now. After we're done reporting it, you're going to immediately turn around, probably change it for the summer, and then change it again for the fall. That's the advantage of getting it out now. We won't have to have conflict over that. Okay, who do we contact when we need a position title or a position added to the drop-down list? If you need to add a position title, that would be me, I think. Just send me an email and tell me what the position should be. For a physician, there is a way to add someone to that. Again, drop me a line. I'll send you information about that. But there is a way you can get in there and add a doctor or medical provider to the list. Offhand, I don't remember what it is because it's been a while, but you should be able to do that from within the file. So I'll look that up and get back to you. Just send me an email so that I remember to reply to you. Okay. And just one other thing, it doesn't have a lot to do with this, but it is a question that I've received several times. People want to know what's up with being able to upload documents in Copa HR or for HR through the eDocs. The answer is I don't know. We're in contact with the developer and trying to get that resolved. I think the most recent update to the Copa software changed some of the permission structure around document sharing. but I don't know exactly how that worked or why it changed. I still can upload documents though. So if you have something urgent you need to upload and you can't do it again, depending on the sensitivity of it, you can send it to me. But I mean, if it's personal information that shouldn't be public, you probably don't want to send it through email. So we'll be working on that, and I'll get back to everybody about that. You mentioned unqualified teachers. Is it okay to add a staff with another title, such as director or food aide? You can add them. In fact, you should, because there is a question about total staff. But you cannot assign them to a class as a teacher because you have to have certain job titles to be on that list. So we need to have 2 teachers. I know people are of 2 minds about this, but we need to have 2 people in the classroom. So if you don't have 2 qualified people, then you have to report an unqualified person, because we have to meet staffing requirements. And the rule is, really, if there aren't 2 adults to staff the classroom, it needs to close. You can't operate with 1, let alone none. And then what information has to be entered in Copa HR for substitutes? We need pretty much everything to be specific, because if we don't have someone else in the position, we're reporting them on the PIR. We need their education, their degree, and major entered, and then you have to have the right job title. But we need something in the salary line, because it's going to be averaged in as 0 if you don't enter anything. And what that means is, let's say you have trying to do the math. Okay, so you have a teacher there who makes $30,000 a year. I'm just pulling that out of the air. And then you have another position, and you have a temp in there, so you don't put a salary in. Copa is going to report your average teacher salary as $15,000 a year, because it's 30 plus 0 divided by 2. So we can't have that, because that's not accurate. So we can't have blanks in that area. While I'm on the subject, you can't put commas in there. So if your numbers look crazy, make sure that when you put salary information in, you put 30,000 as 30000, not 30, comma 000, because Copa will stop with the comma and will count it as $30. That is a long-standing bug, but you got to be aware of that. So look at it and make sure that the numbers on the report are not crazy. Oh, do you need to enter substitutes on the turnover document? Not necessarily. We do need to have them in the system, like, again, for the head count. But if your document says, here was the teacher's name, this is the date when she left, and we're still trying to hire to replace her, that actually should be what we report, I think. Do you recommend that the salary for the temporary be what we are paying the agency? That's a difficult question. Sometimes you're paying the agency a lot more than the teacher is being paid, but it depends on what that figure is. Again, the reason we're putting it in there is we want to avoid making the number look crazy. So just look at what the effect is on the PIR. Probably we do want to put that in there, because that is how it impacts program cost. But I don't know. I mean, yes, I think we do, but unless it makes the compensation section of the report look strange. And even then, I think we'd still report it. We would just put a note in there that says this average is off because we have a substitute that is being contracted at a high rate, something like that.
Hi, Craig. This is Tom. Before you go on to
Yeah.
your next question, I got a question that was sent to me. There was a
Certainly.
hand raise, and we can't unmute people right now. They said, we have an infant toddler specialist who also works with Head Start children. How do we classify her? She's actually 50% Head Start, 50% early Head Start.
That's a good question, but if you put them both in, again, the person will show up on both reports. So when you say infant toddler specialist, if that's someone who is working with children in a specific classroom, and so they're being counted as part of the educational staff in the early Head Start classroom, then they should not include the Head Start because we don't want them on the report. But if they're not a classroom person, but they're just support staff who works with families, say, from both programs, then you would want to put both funding sources on there because they would add them to the question of how many total staff do you have. And I realize that's not always going to be completely accurate because of the way that Copa is dividing this up, but that's really the best I can do. So again, if they're assigned to a classroom, then that should override the rest of it, and they should get the same funding source as the classroom. Now, when people say that, they spend part of their time in one classroom, part of their time in another classroom, I'm not sure how to report that. It's kind of problematic because I want to know who is in that room the rest of the time. It's just like sometimes you see a site that has 2 teachers in 2 classrooms, and both classrooms have the same assistant teacher. We really can't have that because that's only one person. So on the report, right, you would have 2 teachers and 1 assistant. They don't count twice because you assign them to 2 classrooms because who else is in the room when they're not there? It's still understaffed. So that's kind of the consideration. So we really want to make sure we have enough adults. So if the classroom staff, we need to decide which classroom they're in and then who counts as the other adult in the other classroom, even if in practice they move around. Because we need 2 adults at all times, which means you, as an adult, you can't be assigned to 2 classrooms. What if a teacher is out due to an injury? Do we add to the sub to Copa with salary? I mean, the short version is yes, and the long version is if they're out for a week and a half, you probably don't need to add them. But if someone is out for a while on FMLA or something, they're rehabbing an injury and can't come in for several weeks or a month, then we need to have the substitute entered in there, even though the staff person is still working for you, because we need to know who's in the classroom. So when we have a federal review, which hasn't happened for a while because it's been kind of delayed by COVID, but we will have one at some point here. What happens is the feds ask us for a list of teachers in classrooms, and then they go visit based on that. So if we've given them someone's name and they go there and that's not the person, that's a problem. So that's why we're saying you need to put the subs in. So if the person is going to be out for a while, yeah, that the substitute needs to be the person assigned to the classroom in the interim there. Okay. So here's an interesting one. If the agency hires an employee and receives positive background check results, from state and FBI but haven't received the results from DCFS background check unit, should the agency still go ahead and enter the employee in Copa or wait for DCFS results? Yes. So you should enter them when they're hired. And then there's a start date that you wouldn't use until after the background check date. But if you notice there are 4 different categories of background checks that are in the system, and when you get a workup from DCFS, all 4 of them are on there. But if you receive background check results from a couple of the sources, you can go ahead and put them in on the correct line and populate the initial background check date. And then you can put, when you get the other information, you can put that in with the correct date. As we're going forward now and we're asking for people to be reviewed on a 5-year basis, that means that not all of the dates will be the same anymore anyway. So that initial background check date, which is when you first got a clearance from somebody, will always be there. So that top line, you won't ever update. And so some people will be here and you'll look in there and that initial date will say like 1987, but then all of the other ones will be more recent because it's been redone. So it's really the same case now. If you don't get all of them back at the same time, you populate the date with the first one you receive, and then you populate it with the other dates as they come in. Okay. So I realize I have taken up much more of your time. I started this thinking it would be short. I really thought the over-under on this would be about 45 minutes. And I see the time now. So I won't keep you for much longer. I realize there are going to continue to be some other issues. Again, you can see on the screen now should still be my contact information. So if you have ongoing issues with this, I'll try to clarify them and get back to you as quickly as possible. So just send me an email and I'll look through those the rest of the afternoon. Oh, what's my title? I'm the supervisor of the data team, small but mighty data team. It's just me and Jennifer Santana right now, which is why it may take a little bit for us to get back to you, but we will do so. And so I want to thank everybody for participating today. Again, tomorrow, if you're involved with Head Start, Early Head Start Family Services, we'll see you again. Otherwise, make sure that whoever at your agency does those things knows what's going on, is aware of that, so they can tune in as well, and we can get that piece covered. That one, I promise, will be shorter than an hour. I'm almost certain. Anyway, thank you very much for taking part. I'm happy to see such a positive response, and we'll see most of you tomorrow.